A strange thing happens when you become an adult. You start believing your real life hasn't started yet. You tell yourself things like, I'll start saving seriously when I earn a little more. I'll invest after things calm down. I'll take care of my health once work becomes less stressful. I'll finally feel in control next year. And at first, those thoughts sound reasonable, because life really is busy. Money really is tight. The timing really does feel bad sometimes. But then a few months pass. Then a few years. And slowly, waiting becomes a lifestyle. Not because you're lazy, not because you don't care, but because somewhere along the way, you started believing that progress only counts when conditions are perfect. And for a lot of people, that moment never comes. The salary still doesn't feel high enough. The economy still feels uncertain. Work is still exhausting. There's always another bill, another emergency, another reason to delay the things that matter. And one day, you look around and realize you weren't actually standing still. Life was moving the entire time. And that's the dangerous part about waiting for the right time. It rarely feels like waiting while you're inside it. It just feels like being responsible. I think most people misunderstand procrastination. They imagine it as laziness, discipline problems, poor time management. But a lot of the time, procrastination is actually emotional protection, especially when money is involved. Because financial decisions carry emotional weight, saving money forces you to think about the future. Investing forces you to confront uncertainty. Changing careers forces you to risk stability. Starting something new forces you to face the possibility of failure. So the brain does something very human. It delays discomfort. Not forever, just for now. That's why people say things like, I'll start investing after I learn more. I'll budget after this stressful month. I'll focus on money once life settles down. But life rarely settles down completely. There's almost always something happening. And honestly, that's what makes modern adulthood so mentally exhausting. You're trying to improve your future while constantly managing the pressure of the present. Rent keeps increasing. Groceries feel more expensive every year. Work follows you home through your phone. Everyone online seems to be moving faster than you. So your brain naturally looks for certainty before making moves. The problem is, certainty is expensive. And most people wait so long trying to avoid mistakes that they accidentally create a much bigger one, inaction. I once heard someone say something interesting. They said, people overestimate the risk of starting and underestimate the risk of staying the same. That stayed with me because staying the same feels safe in the short term. But over time, it quietly becomes its own kind of risk. Think about how many people stay in jobs they hate for years because they're waiting for the perfect opportunity. Or how many people delay learning about money because they feel embarrassed. They don't already understand it. Or how many people tell themselves they'll finally get financially organized after one more raise. But then the raise comes, and somehow life expands to meet it. The apartment gets nicer. The subscriptions increase. The weekend spending grows. The stress stays exactly the same. Because external improvements don't automatically create internal clarity. And that's something people don't talk about enough. A lot of financial progress is psychological before it's mathematical. Someone can earn twice as much as you and still feel financially trapped. Because if your habits, fears, and emotional patterns stay the same, more money often just creates a more expensive version of the same anxiety. One of the biggest traps in adult life is believing preparation and progress are the same thing. They're not. Researching investing for 3 years is not the same as investing. Watching productivity videos is not the same as changing your routine. Thinking about improving your finances is not the same as improving them. And this happens because preparation feels productive. It gives the brain relief. You feel responsible, thoughtful, careful. But eventually, excessive preparation becomes avoidance wearing a smarter outfit. Because action contains uncertainty. And uncertainty makes people uncomfortable. Especially people who grew up around financial instability. When you've seen money problems up close, your brain becomes extremely cautious. You start trying to optimize every decision, avoid every mistake, control every outcome. But life doesn't really work that way. No one feels fully ready. Not for investing, not for career changes, not for buying a home, not for starting over, not even for becoming an adult, honestly. Most people are improvising far more than they admit. And I think social media makes this even harder. Because now you constantly see people showing the outcome without the uncertainty that came before it. You see, the successful business, the investment gains, the new apartment, the confidence. But you don't see the years where they felt confused, or financially behind, or uncertain whether they were making the right decision. So you start assuming everyone else figured life out faster than you. Meanwhile, you're sitting there waiting to feel ready. But readiness is strange. Sometimes it never arrives before action. Sometimes action creates readiness. That's the part most people discover too late. Confidence usually comes after repetition. Clarity often comes after mistakes. Momentum often comes after awkward beginnings. Very few people begin their financial life feeling secure. Most people begin feeling uncertain. There's also another reason people wait. And it's less logical than financial experts usually admit. A lot of people are emotionally attached to the fantasy of a future version of themselves. The future version who finally has discipline, finally understands money, finally feels calm, finally has enough saved, finally becomes organized, and imagining that future self can feel comforting. Because it creates psychological distance from today's problems. But there's a hidden danger in that. Sometimes people become so attached to the future version of themselves that they stop helping the current version. They wait for motivation instead of building systems. They wait for confidence instead of practicing consistency. They wait for a perfect financial plan instead of starting small. And years quietly disappear that way, not dramatically, just gradually. One of the most powerful financial shifts a person can make is realizing that small, imperfect actions matter more than emotionally perfect intentions. Because wealth is rarely built through dramatic moments. It's usually built through boring repetition. Small savings, consistent investing, avoiding unnecessary debt, learning slowly, making slightly better decisions over time. That's why compound interest is so powerful, psychologically, not just financially. Because compound growth rewards consistency more than intensity. And honestly, that applies to life in general. Most people think progress should feel dramatic, but real progress often feels almost invisible while it's happening. You save a little, learn a little, improve a little, then years later, your entire life looks different. I think this is why people become discouraged so easily in the beginning. The early stages of financial improvement are emotionally unrewarding. You budget carefully, and your life still feels expensive. You save your first $1,000, and it still doesn't feel like security. You invest small amounts, and the growth barely looks noticeable. So people think, what's the point? But the point is not immediate transformation. The point is changing your direction. And direction matters more than speed over long periods of time. A person moving slowly toward stability will eventually outperform someone endlessly waiting for ideal conditions. There's also something surprisingly peaceful about accepting that life may never fully stabilize before you begin. That realization changes things. Because instead of waiting for anxiety to disappear before acting, you start learning how to move alongside uncertainty. You stop treating fear as proof you shouldn't begin. And honestly, adulthood becomes much lighter after that. Not easy, but lighter. Because you stop needing perfection to make progress. Now obviously, this doesn't mean making reckless decisions. It doesn't mean quitting your job impulsively or investing money you can't afford to lose. But there's a difference between thoughtful caution and permanent hesitation. Thoughtful caution asks, have I considered the risks? Permanent hesitation asks, what if I never feel completely certain? And that second question has no satisfying answer. Because certainty is not really how human life works. Most meaningful decisions come with incomplete information. You just learn, adjust, and continue. I think some people are secretly waiting for a moment where they suddenly feel like a financially confident adult. But for most people, that feeling grows gradually through experience. You build trust in yourself slowly by handling problems, recovering from mistakes, making small promises to yourself and keeping them. That's where real confidence comes from, not from having a perfect plan. And maybe that's the deeper issue underneath all of this. A lot of people think money problems are only mathematical, but many of them are emotional timing problems. People delay improving their finances because they're overwhelmed, ashamed, exhausted, afraid of failing, afraid of looking irresponsible, afraid of making the wrong move, so they wait. But waiting doesn't remove uncertainty, it just delays adaptation. And adaptation is what actually creates resilience over time. If there's one thing I've noticed about financially stable people, it's not that they always made perfect decisions, it's that they stopped expecting perfect conditions before taking reasonable action. They started before they felt fully ready. They learned while moving. They adjusted gradually. And most importantly, they stopped treating progress like an all-or-nothing event, because it never was. A better financial life is usually built through hundreds of small ordinary decisions that barely feel important in the moment. Packing lunch sometimes, saving automatically, spending more intentionally, learning patiently, taking one step before confidence fully arrives. None of those actions feel dramatic, but together, they quietly change a person's future. And maybe that's reassuring in its own way. Because if progress is built slowly, then you don't need to become a completely different person overnight. You don't need perfect discipline, perfect timing, perfect confidence. You just need enough honesty to recognize where you are, and enough patience to keep moving anyway. Even slowly. Especially slowly. Because the right time, people spend years waiting for often looks very ordinary once it finally arrives. A normal Tuesday, a small decision, a quiet beginning, nothing dramatic, just a moment where someone finally decides, I think I've waited long enough. And honestly, that moment matters more than most people realize.